In the heart of Mexico, behind the towering walls and razor wire of Altiplano, one of the world's most secure prisons, a legend was being written. A story so audacious, so unbelievable, that it would shake governments, humiliate authorities, and cement the myth of one man. Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera, better known as El Chapo. To the world, he was a ruthless drug lord, head of the feared Sinaloa cartel. But to his followers, he was something more, a man who could not be contained. On July 11, 2015, the impossible happened. El Chapo vanished from his cell, not with violence, not with a riot, but through a tunnel, a mile-long passage, hand-dug beneath the earth, connecting his shower stall to freedom. It was an escape that seemed pulled from the pages of a Hollywood script, yet it was very real. This is the story of El Chapo's great escape. To understand the scale of this prison break, we must first understand the man behind it. El Chapo rose from poverty in rural Sinaloa, a small-time marijuana grower who would one day rule a multi-billion-dollar drug empire. His name became synonymous with power, corruption, and violence. But there was something else too, a cunning ability to outwit law enforcement time and time again. Arrested once in 1993, he managed to live lavishly inside a prison cell, bribing guards and maintaining control of his empire from within. And when the pressure grew too strong, he disappeared. In 2001, hidden in a laundry cart, El Chapo slipped past guards and vanished into the night, bribing his way out of incarceration. For over a decade, he remained at large, orchestrating cartel operations that spread across continents. But in February 2014, the Mexican government, under heavy international pressure, captured him again. This time, they promised, things would be different. El Chapo was locked inside Altiplano, Mexico's most secure maximum security prison. Cameras watched his every move. Guards patrolled constantly. The concrete walls were said to be impenetrable. Authorities boasted that escape was impossible. But El Chapo was a man who thrived on the impossible. Life inside Altiplano was meant to break prisoners. Cells were small, cold, and isolating. Inmates were moved without warning to prevent escape planning. But El Chapo was no ordinary inmate. He communicated in secret, passed messages, and devised plans that few could even imagine. Somewhere in those months behind bars, the vision of a new escape was born. The plan was breathtaking in its ambition. Engineers and cartel operatives began digging a tunnel from a modest house, purchased under false names, in a rural area near the prison. Slowly, methodically, they burrowed through the earth, carving out a passage that would stretch more than a mile in length. The tunnel was not crude or simple. It was a masterpiece of engineering, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and even rails on which a motorcycle was mounted to transport supplies and speed up the digging. Every detail had been meticulously considered. Every inch brought them closer to the prison walls. Inside Altiplano, El Chapo appeared calm, routine, unremarkable. Guards noted nothing unusual. He showered daily at the same time, exercised, and followed the rhythms of prison life. But beneath his feet, the earth was being carved into his salvation. On the night of July 11th, at 8:52 p.m., El Chapo entered the small shower area of his cell. Cameras caught him pacing briefly, bending down behind a small partition wall that offered privacy from surveillance, and then nothing. Minutes passed. Guards expected him to reappear, but he never did. When they entered the cell, they found only silence. El Chapo was gone. Beneath the shower floor lay a hole, neatly cut, leading into darkness. The opening dropped into a ladder, descending into the earth. From there, the tunnel stretched into the distance, illuminated and ready. El Chapo climbed down, mounted the waiting motorcycle cart, and raced to freedom. Above ground, the house that hid the tunnel entrance stood empty, abandoned in the night. The prison went into chaos. Sirens blared, guards scrambled, but it was too late. By the time authorities realized what had happened, El Chapo was long gone. The most wanted man in the world had humiliated Mexico's security forces once again. News of the escape spread like wildfire. In Mexico, it was met with shock and anger. Citizens accused the government of incompetence, or worse, collusion. How could such an elaborate tunnel have been dug without inside help? How could a prisoner under constant surveillance simply vanish? To many, the answer was obvious: corruption. Investigations revealed shocking details. Construction of the tunnel had taken over a year. Specialized builders, some believed to be trained in mining, had been hired by the cartel. Equipment was purchased and moved under false identities. Noise and activity were carefully disguised to avoid suspicion. And most damning of all, evidence suggested that prison staff may have looked the other way, whether out of fear or for bribes. For months, El Chapo remained free, taunting authorities, re-establishing control of his empire. His escape became a symbol not just of his cunning, but of the weakness of the Mexican state in its war against cartels. International pressure mounted. The United States, furious over the humiliation, demanded action. Finally, in January 2016, after a series of raids and intelligence operations, Mexican Marines stormed a house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. A bloody gunfight ensued. And once again, El Chapo was captured. This time, authorities vowed there would be no escape. Within a year, he was extradited to the United States, placed under conditions so strict that escape was unthinkable. In 2019, after a lengthy trial filled with tales of violence, bribery, and empire, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years.
Juan Carlos Ramirez continued his testimony in the El Chapo trial yesterday by explaining how Joaquin El Chapo Guzman bought and shipped his cocaine. On his second day of testimony, Ramirez told the court he was El Chapo's #1 supplier. Ramirez said once the cocaine crossed the U.S. border, El Chapo would take 40% and sell it here in the United States.
He claims from 1990 to 1996, Guzman made as much as $640 million. Ramirez's physical appearance has been one of the most surprising factors. He underwent major plastic surgery to avoid being arrested. So joining us now is attorney Paul Batista to bring us up to speed. So, Paul, it certainly seems like we've definitely learned a lot about Guzman's associates or former associates and their various nefarious activities that happen to coincide with, working with Guzman, but not a lot of focus by the prosecution on what Guzman has been doing, his business, his reign of terror, if you will.
He's almost like the ghost in the trial.
Right.
We have had a succession of witnesses who haven't had contact with El Chapo in 20 years. Gutierrez, who I like to call the Lollipop because that's his nickname.
Yes.
Today, he resides inside the walls of the infamous ADX Florence in Colorado, the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies, a facility designed to crush hope, where the idea of tunnels and freedom is nothing more than a memory. But the legend of the tunnel escape lives on. In Mexican folklore, in narco ballads, in whispered stories across the countryside, El Chapo's great escape is remembered not just as an act of defiance, but as proof of how deep corruption runs, how far power can reach, and how one man turned a maximum security prison into a revolving door. For some, it is a story of failure, the failure of a government to protect its citizens, to uphold justice, to defeat the shadow of organized crime. For others, it is the story of a man who defied the system, who outsmarted his captors, and who lived by his own rules until the very end. In the end, El Chapo's tunnel is more than an escape route. It is a symbol of ingenuity, of corruption, of power, a reminder that sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and that legends are not always born on battlefields, but in the silent darkness beneath our feet.